I didn't know what was real anymore. The moment I woke up, I felt it. The coldness in the air, the weight pressing down on my chest. It wasn't just a bad dream. The paralysis didn't just fade away. It clung to me, wrapping around my mind, my body, like a vice, and I realized this wasn't over. It had never been over. At first, I tried to deny it. I told myself that I'd somehow imagined it all. That the monster, the darkness, the whispering voice in my head, were just the result of too much stress, too many sleepless nights. But deep down, I knew. I knew I wasn't alone. I knew the thing I had seen was real, and now, it had become a part of me. I tried to go on with my life, tried to pretend I could live a normal existence, but every night, it came back. Every night, I was dragged back into that same darkness, that same cold grip that pinned me to my bed, unable to move, unable to scream. It never let me go, but this time, it was different. This time, it was stronger. The monster no longer waited for me to fall asleep. It didn't matter if I was awake or not. I could feel it, hovering around me, in the shadows of my house, in the corners of my mind. Its presence was all-consuming, suffocating. I couldn't escape it, couldn't outrun it. It was always there, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, and then, it came, the night it finally took me. I was lying in bed, trying to gather the strength to close my eyes. I was exhausted, my body aching from nights of restless sleep. But I couldn't let myself drift off. I couldn't give in to it. I knew what would happen if I did, but it didn't matter. I closed my eyes, just for a moment, and when I opened them again, it was there. It was standing at the foot of my bed, its towering figure blotting out the dim light from the hallway. The room seemed to stretch, the shadows growing longer, twisting around the figure like tendrils of darkness. I couldn't move. My body was frozen in place, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would tear through my chest. I could feel it watching me, its glowing red eyes boring into my soul. It took a step forward, and I could smell it, something foul, like rotting flesh, and the sharp scent of decay. The air grew thick, suffocating, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. It leaned down, its face inches from mine. I could see its teeth now, jagged and broken, stained with something that looked like blood. Its lips twisted into a grin, revealing a mouth too wide, too unnatural to belong to anything human. "You're mine," it whispered, its voice low and harsh, like gravel scraping against metal. "And there's nowhere left to run." The words sent a shock through my body, and for the first time, I tried to fight. I tried to scream, to move, to push it away, but it was useless. My body wouldn't obey. I was trapped in a cage of my own mind, a prisoner of my own fear. But then, something inside me snapped. In that moment, I realized something. The monster thrived on my fear. It fed on it. It grew stronger the more I resisted, the more I tried to escape. But what if I stopped resisting? What if I stopped fighting? I couldn't keep running. I couldn't keep pretending that I wasn't scared. So I did something I had never done before. I let go. I stopped fighting. I stopped resisting. I accepted it, and in that moment of acceptance, the room changed. The shadows that had been twisting around the monster seemed to recoil, pulling back into the corners of the room, away from the figure. The suffocating weight that had been pressing down on my chest began to lighten, just slightly. I could still feel the monster there, but it was different. It wasn't as strong. It wasn't as real. The more I let go, the more the fear began to drain from me. The grip it had on my mind began to loosen, like a tightening knot that was slowly unraveling. I was still paralyzed, still unable to move, but the terror wasn't as sharp. It wasn't as all-encompassing, and then, the monster did something I didn't expect. It stepped back. Slowly. Reluctantly. "You think you've won," it hissed, its voice dripping with venom. "You can't escape me. I'll always be here, lurking in the dark. Watching." But even as it spoke, I felt it retreat. It didn't disappear, but it faded, the oppressive presence lifting from the room, the suffocating pressure releasing its hold on me. The shadows melted back into the walls, and the air cleared, becoming just a little bit lighter. I don't know if the monster is gone. I don't know if it will ever be truly gone. But that night, for the first time in what felt like forever, I was able to sleep without the weight of it on my chest. I didn't feel it watching me, didn't feel it breathing down my neck, but as I lie here, in the quiet of my room, I know one thing for sure: it's still out there, and I don't know how long I can keep it at bay. The days blurred together after that. Each night felt like a battle I wasn't sure I could win. I started sleeping in shifts, trying to avoid the full depth of the darkness by staying awake until I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore. But that never worked. The paralysis came whether I was exhausted or alert, whether I had been asleep for 5 minutes or 5 hours. It was as if the monster had claimed me, marked me as its prey. I tried everything: sleeping pills, herbal teas, even therapy, but nothing helped. The paralysis didn't care. It didn't care about my exhaustion, my fear, or my desperate attempts to escape it. Every night, it found me. Every night, it would pull me deeper into its world, and it wasn't just the paralysis anymore. It was the way the monster began to manipulate my mind. I would lie in bed, eyes closed, praying that the night would pass without incident. But I'd always feel it, creeping closer. A soft rustling sound, like a whisper just out of reach. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, a trick my mind was playing on me. But then I started hearing the words again, clear and distinct: "You can't hide." The voice didn't come from outside of me, it came from inside. It wasn't just something I heard, it was something I felt. It settled deep into my chest, vibrating through my bones, as if the words were etched into my very soul. I'd try to ignore it, try to block it out, but the more I resisted, the stronger it became. "You think you're safe. You think you can fight it." I couldn't stop it. The words echoed in my mind, relentless. It was always there, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts, wrapping around my consciousness like a vine, pulling me deeper into its grip. And then, the vision started. I wasn't just seeing the monster in the shadows anymore. I was seeing it in my mind's eye, its twisted, contorted shape, its glowing red eyes, its long, clawed hands. It was there when I closed my eyes, when I looked away for just a moment, when I tried to focus on anything but the crushing fear that gripped my heart. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to look. I had to confront whatever it was that had taken control of my mind. I didn't know what I was expecting. Maybe I thought it would stop if I faced it. Maybe I thought it would lose its power over me if I finally acknowledged its existence, but the moment I looked, it was worse than I could have ever imagined. The room had become different. It was no longer just my bedroom. It was a space that didn't make sense, a place where the walls seemed to breathe, the shadows moved, and the air was thick with something I couldn't name. And there it was: the monster stood in the center of the room, its body rippling with darkness, its form twisting in and out of shape like a nightmare come to life. Its eyes glowed bright red, and as it looked at me, I could feel its gaze crawl under my skin, into my very soul. Its mouth, if you could call it that, opened wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth, stained with something that looked like blood. But it wasn't just the way it looked that terrified me. It was the way it knew me. The way it knew everything about me, everything I had ever feared. "Do you remember what you did?" it whispered, its voice low and guttural, like nails scraping against stone. I didn't understand at first. What did it mean? What had I done? It took a step forward, and the room seemed to warp with its movement. I felt myself backing away, but I couldn't move, my legs frozen in place. It was like being trapped inside my own skin, unable to escape. "Do you remember?" it repeated, its voice louder now, shaking the very air around me. "You thought you could escape. You thought you could run." I had no idea what it was talking about. The longer I stared at it, the more my mind seemed to fracture. The edges of my memories began to blur, fading into something dark and unfamiliar. I tried to hold on to them, to cling to the reality I thought I knew, but it was slipping away, faster and faster, as if the monster was pulling the threads of my life apart. "You should have stayed asleep," it hissed. "But now you're mine." Its words sank deep into my chest, suffocating me with a fear that wasn't just mental, it was physical. I felt it in my very bones. The monster wasn't just in my head anymore. It was in my life. It was in my home. And there was nothing I could do to make it leave. "Don't worry," it whispered, a dark amusement in its voice. "I'm not done with you yet. The world around me seemed to collapse in on itself, folding in layers of darkness. My body was still paralyzed, my limbs useless as I tried to fight, to scream, to break free. But I couldn't. I couldn't do anything, and then, just when I thought I was going to lose myself completely, I woke up, but I wasn't free. I was still trapped. I always knew something was wrong. It wasn't just the dreams, or the overwhelming sense of dread that clung to me during the night. It was something deeper. A presence. A weight that pressed into my chest every time I closed my eyes. I'd been living with it for so long, I couldn't remember what it felt like to sleep without fear. The first time I experienced sleep paralysis, I thought I was dreaming. I had fallen asleep on the couch, in a rare moment of peace after a long day. It had been a restless few months, my mind constantly racing, my sleep disrupted by nightmares I couldn't escape. But that night, for some reason, I felt safe. My room was quiet, the air still, and the faint glow of moonlight illuminated the room just enough for me to feel comfortable, but when I woke up, I wasn't alone. At first, I thought I was still dreaming. My body was frozen, pinned to the couch as if invisible hands were holding me down. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I tried to scream, but nothing came out, and my chest tightened with the suffocating panic that came with being unable to breathe. I could see everything around me, my cluttered living room, the shadows stretching across the floor, the faint hum of the fridge, but the terror grew when I noticed it. A figure. It stood at the edge of the room, partially obscured by the shadows, but I could feel its presence. It was tall, towering over me in a way that made me feel smaller than I already was. Its face, if you could call it a face, was a blur, a mass of swirling blackness. I could make out eyes, or what looked like eyes, but they were not human. They glowed, faintly, like embers from a dying fire, red and predatory. My heart raced as I tried to scream again, but it was useless. I couldn't even blink, and then, it moved, not in any way a human would. It didn't step toward me. It just appeared, suddenly inches from my face, towering over me, its distorted shape blocking out the faint light from the window. I could feel its breath, cold, ragged, against my skin. Its hands, long and skeletal, reached for me, but I couldn't move, couldn't fight back. It was as if the world had been frozen around me, and all I could do was endure. I don't know how long I lay there, paralyzed in fear, but when it finally released me, I was left gasping for air, covered in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was still, silent, but the terror lingered. I thought it was just a bad dream, something my mind had conjured up. Maybe I had fallen asleep in an odd position, maybe I was just overtired. But the feeling that something was watching me didn't fade. In fact, it grew stronger. Days passed, and the nightmares returned. But this time, they weren't confined to the realm of sleep. The monster, or whatever it was, began to appear when I was awake. In the corners of my vision, in darkened hallways, sometimes just outside the window, watching. Waiting. It always started the same way. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my body stiff, my mind foggy, and there it was again. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, and that suffocating weight would settle over me, making it feel like the room itself was alive, pressing in on me. I'd feel its presence, like it was just behind me, in the space I couldn't see. Sometimes it would make noises, low, guttural sounds, like growls or whispers, just out of reach of understanding. And sometimes, it would touch me. It was never a gentle touch. No, it was always something worse. A cold hand gripping my ankle, a sharp, claw-like finger grazing my throat. The sensation of being watched, of being toyed with. I couldn't escape, and then, there was the time it spoke. I remember that night clearly, as if it happened only yesterday. I woke up, as usual, to the feeling of being trapped, unable to move, but this time, something felt different. I could hear it in my head, the voice. It wasn't a voice like mine, or anyone I knew. It was ancient. Old, like a forgotten memory trying to claw its way back to life. You're not going anywhere. I don't know how I knew it was speaking to me. Maybe it was the way the words reverberated in my skull, or the way the room seemed to grow darker, more oppressive with every syllable. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. But then, I heard it again, closer this time, like it was leaning over me, its breath hot on my ear. "You're mine now." I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. All I could do was listen as the darkness closed in, smothering every shred of hope I had left. There was no escape, no relief. Just the suffocating weight of its presence, always there, always watching, and that's when I understood. This wasn't just a nightmare. This wasn't some random sleep disorder. It was real.